ADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and Lome, 1 p.m. in Porto Novo and Abuja. Good afternoon. And many thanks to Chain Tune for West African Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. African leaders call for 2 permanent seats at UN Security Council while tasked to create an enabling investment environment at Tokyo conference.
There is also an obligation on us as leaders of Africa to create the kind of space that makes it possible. 1, we need governance reform. We need to reduce corruption. We must have accountable governance.
Nigeria's aviation authority bans airplane mode, orders mobile phone shut down on aircraft.
If your phones are on, somehow it interferes with the communication system of the aircraft.
In the cockpits, we have a lot of communication devices there. And whenever these phones are receiving signals, it kind of disrupts your radio communication.
Nigerian army neutralizes several terrorists in Difa region operation, and private sector engages Senegalese government on economic and social recovery plan. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
My name is Sankule Janko. Many thanks for joining our broadcast and a warm welcome to our listeners across the sub-region and beyond. Newslink begins with some fallout from the ongoing 9th Tokyo International Conference on African Development in Yokohama, Japan, where Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has called for sweeping reforms at the UN nations to give Africa permanent representation on the UN Security Council. Delivering his address at the plenary session on peace and stability during the conference, President Tinubu reiterated that Africa deserves 2 permanent seats with full privileges. In line with the African Union Zurweni consensus, President Tinubu said the continent deserves additional non-permanent seats. Meanwhile, Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama, in co-chairing the second plenary session during the conference under the theme Economy, co-create innovative solutions with Africa, called on African leaders to embrace reforms if the continent is to attract sustainable trade and investment. He added that the continent must take the hard but necessary steps to silence the guns and stop fighting in order to make the continent an attractive investment hub. Here is President John Dramani Mahama.
I don't think that we walk away from TICAD, we wave a magic wand and everything happens. While we expect that we move from just handouts and ODA to trade and investment with our Japanese counterparts, there is also an obligation on us as leaders of Africa to create the kind of space that makes it possible. 1, we need governance reform. We need to reduce corruption. We must have accountable governance. Our people must feel that their resources are being put to good use. We must make sure that our economies are stable and predictable so that if a Japanese investor wants to come and invest or partner with our young people in the service industry or in industry or fintech or whatever, he knows that he has a stable, predictable environment to be able to make that investment and that he's able to repatriate his profit if he's able to make that profit. And so there's a lot that behoves on us as leadership to create the right platform in Africa for that investment to be able to take place.
Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Away from the ongoing Tokyo conference and to Nigeria, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, NCAA, has directed all airlines in the country to enforce a complete shutdown of mobile phones and electronic devices during takeoff and landing. The new directive marks a shift away from the long-standing practice of using airplane mode during flights. Announcing the policy in Abuja on Wednesday, NCCA Director General Captain Chris Najomo said airlines are also required to update their operations manual to reflect the change. As WDR's Usman Omar reports, the decision has sparked mixed reactions from aviation experts and members of the flying public.
If your phones are on, somehow it interferes with the communication system of the aircraft. Perhaps if only one passenger has their phone on, it may not be that much of a problem. But if everybody's allowed to keep their phones on, it could have that interference.
That was Michael Achimugo, spokesperson for the Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority. However, not everyone agrees with the directive. Many air travelers who reacted on social media platforms say banning airplane mode may not reflect global best practices, warning that the measure could affect Nigeria's reputation in the aviation industry. Wole Shadari is an aviation expert.
We have the fact that they do pose serious risk to aircraft. But it has also proven, because aircraft have become so sophisticated now, that the risk it poses is very, very minimal.
Meanwhile, a commercial pilot who preferred not to be named said that while the effect of phones left on during critical phases of flight may be minimal, it could still interfere with cockpit communications.
In the cockpits, we have a lot of communication devices there. And whenever these phones are receiving signals, it kind of disrupts your radio communication. Take, for example, you have a radio stereo just in front of you, and you try to make a call. You start receiving some static feedback from the radio, like it's very, very distorting. So whenever you are in the airplane and the pilots want to start, making communication, that's why they always advise passengers to put their phone on, not to switch it off, just put it on flight mode. Actually, some regulations, like in Europe, you don't switch off your phone. You also advise you to put it on airplane mode. It's mostly just for takeoff and landing, because definitely when you are airborne, you lose signal automatically.
As the debate continues, Nigerians are waiting to see how the NCAA will enforce the new rule on domestic flights. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Osman Omar reporting from Abuja.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC), in collaboration with the Nigerian Immigration Service, has repatriated 51 foreign nationals convicted of cyber terrorism and internet fraud. The group includes 39 Filipinos, 10 Chinese, and 2 Kazakhstan nationals, and all arrested in December 2024 during a raid in Victoria Island, Lagos. They were convicted, sentenced to 1 year in prison, with the court also ordering the forfeiture of digital assets and other properties seized from them. The convicts were deported to their countries of origin after completing their jail terms. Let's now focus on the Central Sahel region, first in Niger, where the Nigerian army says it has neutralized several terrorists, including Ibrahim Bakura, also known as Abu Umaima, a key Boko Haram leader. This follows an Air Force operation conducted last week in the Difa region, north of the country. In a statement released on Wednesday, the Nigerian Army forces said during the operation, they carried out a series of airstrikes targeting 3 Boko Haram factions based in the northern region. Abdullah Hassan completes the story.
The localities of Korongol, Kurnawa and Shilawa in the Difa region of southeastern Niger were the target of a recent military operation. These areas are known to host large concentrations of jihadists and equipment. According to the Nigerian Armed Forces, airstrikes conducted by the Air Force neutralized several dozen terrorists, including Ibrahim Bakura, also known as Abu Umaima, a key leader of the faction. The strikes also destroyed a significant portion of the group's logistical resources. This large-scale operation caused serious disarray and widespread panic among enemy ranks. Through this action, the Nigerian Armed Forces reaffirm their commitment to defending the country's sovereignty and ensuring long-term security against the terrorist threat.
A report by WDR's Nyami correspondent Mutala Zubairu, voiced by Abdullah Hassan.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
In neighboring Mali, West Africa Democracy Radio continues to review the country under 5 years of military rule. Monday, August 18, 2025 marked the 5th anniversary of the military takeover, which came with a series of promises, including the commitment to improve rights and freedoms. Today, August 21, WDR focuses on the state of human rights and the political landscape in Mali. In this context, Isoda Ngolo, president of the World Organization Against Torture, speaks with Augustine Coley.
Let's say the current human rights situation in the country is a bit blurred. I mean, the high reason is blurred because the current authorities, the military authorities, took up the power with the promise of bringing back democracy, respecting citizens' aspirations to human rights and fundamental liberties. It's not the case today. First of all, the security hasn't been restored. People are still being killed, kidnapped, women being raped, and despite that, they're being supported by foreign military groups from Russia that are accused by several human rights groups of committing massive crimes. These crimes haven't been investigated by the authorities.
That was Isoro Ngolu, is president of the World Organization Against Torture, and he joins us in the second half of the news for more analysis. In more human rights issues, a new report by Human Rights Watch reveals that authorities in Senegal have abandoned internally displaced people affected by the coastal flooding in Khariala on the outskirts of Saint Louis city centre. According to the report, approximately 1,000 people now living in Khariala come from centuries-old fishing communities on the Langue de Barbarie, a narrow strip of land highly vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. For the past 9 years, these displaced residents have remained in Khariala without access to essential services, living in conditions that violate human rights. Imo Edet has the details in this report.
In its report, Human Rights Watch said the flood-displaced people in Khayala outside the Saint Louis city centre are suffering ongoing human rights violations with no durable solution from the Senegalese authorities. The rights group accuses the Senegalese government of failing to include the flood-affected families in the World Bank-funded planned relocation of others from the same communities who were affected by coastal floods. Charlotte Feingold is a legal fellow at Human Rights Watch and co-author of the report.
Our research found that inaction by the Senegalese authorities, mainly at the local level, and the distance between Khariala and the coast, the Langue de Barbarie Peninsula, has led to violations of the right to an adequate standard of living, particularly the right to adequate housing, as well as people's rights to education, health, and to take part in cultural life. Under international law, there are several criteria that define what makes housing adequate, and several of those criteria are not met in Khariala.
Meanwhile, the report recommends that Senegal should urgently remedy the rights violations in Khariala and develop a policy to ensure that future climate-displaced communities receive adequate support, including through rights respecting planned relocation, among other solutions.
The community wants to leave, and we are recommending that the government facilitate that. In the meantime, though, because that will take a long time, it's really important that the government improve conditions in the site to make it more livable. So to that end, we're recommending that the Senegalese government develop a new policy to help internally displaced communities like Khariala to find durable solutions. And that should include through rights-respecting, community-driven planned relocations taken as a last resort.
Released on August 18, 2025, the 72-page report titled Waiting for God, Flood Displacement and Planned Relocation of Fisher Folk in Saint Louis, Senegal, concerns families who lost everything when coastal floods hit their historic fishing communities on the Langue de Barbarie Peninsula in 2015 and 2016.
That filed that report. Was still in Senegal, a major meeting regarding the Senegalese government's economic and social recovery plan took place on Wednesday between Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko and private sector actors. The objective of the meeting was to share the guidelines of the economic and social recovery plan recently presented by the head of the government. Prime Minister Sonko maintains that the government is counting on the commitment of private economic actors to implement its economic transformation strategy. Augustine Colley reports.
During the meeting, Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko presented the main thrusts of the economic recovery plan to private sector stakeholders. He also emphasized the government's commitment to strengthening the role of the private sector in implementing state projects and programs.
We believe in the private sector. I have always said, from 2014 to now, that I do not know of any country that has developed without a strong strong industrial budgets. We need to mobilize resources because we have a public finance problem. Some have said that it was a plan to address public finances. It goes beyond public finances because we do not mobilize these resources for the functioning of the state. We use the resources to reinvest them. And I know that the different segments of the private sector, whether it's construction, the various industrial production sectors, are the ones who will benefit much more from the outcomes of the recovery plan.
Meanwhile, representatives of employees' organizations welcomed the initiative and expressed their willingness to contribute to the implementation of the recovery plan. Private sector stakeholders are calling on the government to support them in this initiative.
The private sector was the first group that the President of the Republic received. We know that you want it to be strong, and we know that you are sincere. Mr. Prime Minister, help us to play and fulfill our role in supporting the government.
Notre ambition, c'est d'être à vos côtés.
Our ambition is to be by your side, to tell you objectively, Mr. Prime Minister.
C'est pas bon, et nous n'attendons rien de l'État.
As a reminder, the Economic Recovery Plan presented by Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko on August 1 will be financed to the tune of more than 5,000 billion CFA francs.
Augustine Colley filed that report. You are listening to Newslink here on West African Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. African leaders call for 2 permanent seats at UN Security Council while tasked to create enabling investment environment at Tokyo conference. Nigeria's Aviation Authority bans airplane mode, orders mobile phones shut down on aircraft. Nigerian army neutralizes several terrorists in Difa region operation, and private sector engages Senegalese government on economic and social recovery plan. Still ahead in news, we have press review, guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
We turn our attention to Liberia, where 2 U.S. congressmen are currently in discussions with authorities aimed at strengthening ties between the United States and the West African nation. U.S. Senator Jack Reed and Representative Gabe Emo, both from Rhode Island, arrived in Monrovia at the invitation of President Joseph Boakai. Their visit focuses on assessing the current state of affairs in Liberia and exploring the opportunities for deeper cooperation between the 2 countries. Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker reports.
Senator Reid and Representative Amon have been engaging in discussions with a variety of stakeholders, including government officials, representatives from non-governmental organizations, and national security experts. These talks focus on a range of issues, including economic development, healthcare, education, and infrastructure, among others. During one of their engagements, Senator Reid emphasized Liberia's upcoming role as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council.
I think we have great faith, their common sense, and their commitment to the values of the United Nations, which is a peaceful world in which we can cooperate with each other for the advancement of all people. And as a result, I think Liberia is going to be a real asset on the Security Council. The decency and dignity of the Liberian people are so impressive. So it's going to be a great thing. And it's also important to have on that council perspectives from all over the world.
Meanwhile, Representative Amon expressed his concerns regarding the challenges faced by Liberians and local implementers due to recent changes within USAID.
I know the state that Liberia finds itself in, and there's great promise and opportunity for forging greater ties. It's been a wonderful opportunity to hear directly from Liberians, for example, local implementers, around the challenges with regard to USAID no longer being what it once was, and to say there are real consequences. I've had some very difficult conversations with administration officials in hearings to say there are consequences, so how can we reverse some of those cuts?
Upon the their return to the United States, Senator Reid and Representative Amon plan to brief their colleagues in Congress. They also aim to mobilize the Liberian American community in Rhode Island and other regions to support Liberia in various capacities. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Over the latest newspaper headline stories in Ghana, let's join our Accra correspondent Nadidi Tete for the top stories.
Greetings. Welcome to the newspaper review segment. We'll start off with a daily graphic newspaper front page. Japan eyes Ghana for big investments. Other stories here. Africa must unite to facilitate economic growth, Jacob Zuma says. Police and Ghana Journalists Association partner for journalist safety. And WASI takes off smoothly in all centers. Let's now go to the Ghanaian Times newspaper front page. Ghana's population hits 33.7 million. Policymakers urged to turn it into opportunities. Other stories here on the Ghanaian Times front page. We are open to business. President Mahama woos investors at TCAD 9. And Gold Board begins enforcement of receipts used by licensed buyers. The BNFT producer price inflation slows down to 3.8% in July. Also here, over 100 Japanese firms attend Presidential Investment Forum. And final story here, mining law set for major overhaul. The Chronicle newspaper front page, Mahama's big push under threat as capital expenditure fell short by 10.95 billion cedis from the programmed 18.06 billion. And Africa deserves good governance, former President Akufo-Addo says. The Daily Guide newspaper front page, we have the men to safeguard Akwitia by-election. That's according to the IGP. Also, Ablekuma North rerun, 8 arrested over violence, NPP demands action, and 2 women remanded over TikTok assault on Mahama. We'll wrap up with the Daybreak newspaper front page. Police arrest 8 for causing violence in Ablekuma North rerun. Also here, US donates $1 million worth of women's body armor to Ghana Armed Forces. And NPP lost 2024 polls due to poor communication, says Educhum. And finally, Chief of Staff inaugurates MEDA board. And that'll be it for the newspaper review segment. It's back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Nadidi Tete, for the latest press review from Ghana.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Well, for our guest interview this afternoon, we continue to analyze the socio-political and economic situation in Mali, 5 years on after the military took over the helm of affairs. Recall Monday, August 18, 2025 marked the 5th anniversary of the military takeover, a move that came with a series of promises, including the commitment to improve rights and freedoms. Today, August 21, WDR focuses on the state of human rights and the political landscape in Mali. For more insight on that, we are joined by Isidore Ngolu, president of the World Organization Against Torture.
First of all, the security hasn't been restored, and that's not the case. People are still being killed, kidnapped, women being raped in some parts of the territory. And despite that, they're being attacked by their own soldiers and supported by foreign military groups from Russia that are accused by several human rights groups of committing massive crimes. These crimes haven't been investigated by the authorities, despite several reports establishing that they were intentionally committed. A lot of people demonstrated in the streets in 2020 against the previous civilian regime, mainly because they were seeking the fundamental freedom of opinion, of dissenting opinion. And they could even demonstrate in the street at that time. Today, it's not the case. People cannot guarantee the right to demonstrate. I mean, leaders of political parties cannot anymore operate. They have been, for all of them, denied operations, and media cannot cover the political parties' work. So it's really worrisome that at the time people were criticizing the civilians for attacking fundamental freedoms, and they kind of welcomed the military with the mandate to restore democracy. And today, this is not the case, and it's even worse than it was before.
You spoke of political parties which have been suspended by the military in power, including political activities. What impact do you think this suspension of political parties and associations will have on the right to political participation in Mali?
I mean, let's say the current authorities have not withdrawn from democracy. They didn't. They maintained the constitution of Mali. They maintained engagement in all international treaties that Mali have ratified. So let's assume that we're supposedly still in a democratic system, because they haven't said that they don't want to be democratic anymore. So based on that, every citizen has the right to express a political opinion, whether it is supporting the people in power or dissenting. And they have the right to do it collectively, which means to create and exercise political activities. This is what is written clearly in the Malian constitution. It is written in all the treaties that Mali has ratified, both at the regional and international level. You can't be in the power with your military attires and the guns and imposing people and threatening them, claiming that this is a democracy. This is not a democracy. You have to assume that you are in something else.
Now, the current head of the junta in Mali, General Assimi Goïta, has been granted another 5 years by the transitional parliament, and it's renewable. And tell me, with this next 5 years on the agenda, what do you think will happen to the practice of human rights in Mali?
I mean, this is not the first time we see military taking power and trying to remain in power. This is something we've seen in Africa for a long time. For some, it has not lasted long. For some others, has lasted. But one thing that is common is that it has always ended, and sometimes badly. I think we don't need to get there. I think it's good that the Malians leaders sit together and stop this. The people who have granted the current leaders another 5 years and renewable are not people that were chosen democratically. The parliament is not an elected parliament. It's also a pick and choose, and people are protecting their seats. So this is not democracy anyway. And even if it was an African democracy, something that wants to be distantiated from the European one or whatever, then this is not how Africans do their things.
Well, Isidore Ngolo is president of the World Organization Against Torture. Well, in sports, I have with me in the studio my colleague Christopher Aticho. And Christopher, we've seen some very amazing results in the Afro basketball.
Interesting.
Of course, Senegal, I understand, beat Nigeria. Yes. Mali also were victors. Tell us more.
Well, of course, as rightly said, Mali actually won their game over Ivory Coast, beating them 102 to 96. And also, Senegal was in action against Nigeria. Senegal made sure that they actually made a statement yesterday by winning 91 to 75 over Nigeria. And interestingly, today also there are some action in the world of basketball as far as the Afro basket is concerned. And Cameroon will be in action against Egypt. That match is expected to be at 3 p.m. today. And then Angola would also take on Cape Verde as well.
Well, finally, before I let you go, there are some fixtures in the ongoing Chan African Nations.
Yes.
And all the host countries are qualified.
Host countries have qualified for the quarterfinals of the tournament. And that makes Africa football very, very beautiful. So today, tomorrow rather, which is the 22nd day of August, Kenya will take on Madagascar, and then Tanzania would also take on Morocco, and also Uganda will take on Senegal on Saturday, August 23. Sudan is also in action. Sudan would also take on Algeria as well on Saturday, August 23.
Well, I'm interested in
Who are you tipping?
Of course, I'm a Senegalese. I have Senegalese.
I bet to tell you that Sudan is really making lots of waves in this particular tournament.
Let's see how things turn out. That's the sport news with Christopher Aticho. Well, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Falilu So and Umu Danyogo for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X and Instagram, WADR English, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is WADR's Environment Program, Enviroscope with Abdullahi Hassan. I am Sankule Janko. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Nibe County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia, Radio Gulf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you.